Hello and welcome to Platinum Politics. I'm your host, Mace, and today we have a discussion about whether or not Trump's executive orders disproportionately harm the black community. I happen to be scrolling through the server and I noticed that there was a conversation going on in one of the voice chats, so I decided to join. I noticed that the conversation going on was beginning to get real heated and that neither side really understood what the other one was trying to say. So I decided to step in, capture it, and it actually ended up being a really productive conversation. Don't forget to join the server. Link down in description. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And now for today's impromptu debate.
By examining his own attitude towards the possibilities of peace.
Tariffs on Canadian steel would be entirely unjustified.
I have detractors? I don't believe it.
You can start whenever.
All right, so my name is ongodilovewater. I think that the Conservative Party currently is harming black people in the sense that the actions they are taking are going to negatively affect the black community. However, I don't think that they are specifically targeting the black community. The main point that I'm going to try and argue here is that even though the Conservative Party might be harming black people through their rhetoric and their actions, I don't think they're specifically targeting black people. And I think that we as Democrats, or at least myself as a Democrat, should push a more precise image of what the Conservative Party is doing. And yeah, that's my opening remark.
And Puma?
So my position is going to be that I don't really know for certain about the majority of the Republican Party pushing for this. I do know that are targeting black communities. I do believe that some are, but honestly, I don't think it matters whether or not they actually want to do it or not. What they're doing and what they're going to do is enact laws and governmental action that will have severe negative impacts on society. Not just necessarily on society, but on the black community in particular will have a hard time with this. That they'll actually remove the amount of restrictions and progress they've made. That's all.
All right, Water. I'll give you 5 minutes for rebuttal.
All right, so when we say that it doesn't necessarily matter if the majority of Republicans are pushing for this or not, I think it really does. Because especially if, when we're thinking about 2028, right, when we're going to be running for the election again, right, I think it's going to be really difficult to be running again, especially considering that we had Joe Biden, which regardless of what you think of as the president, Republicans use him as a massive scapegoat for everything, right? You see it in Donald Trump's inauguration speech. You saw it even during his presidency, right? Regardless of if he did something good, it was heavily criticized by the right. So when we're looking at that, I think that it really should matter what a majority of conservatives think. Because especially if we can convince a lot of conservative voters to come to our side on that, or agree on even one point, right? Eventually, that's going to make its way up the chain, right? To eventually probably congressmen and senators. It might seem a little hard to believe that your voice could be the changing factor, right? That changes the senator's mind. That totally could be the case, especially because remember, politicians want to keep their job, right? They're like every other profession, right? They want to keep their job. So if a majority of Republicans are against it, then that means that these senators are probably going to vote as the people do. That's the first problem that I have with it. And second of all, when we're talking about removing or enacting laws and actions that have severe negative impacts on society and the black community, I think that the way the Conservative Party looks at it is that they're helping black people, right? Because I know that the biggest stereotype that conservative racists have of the black community, and this is an extreme example, I'll admit, but it's a pretty accurate one, is that black people are just looking for a handout, right? That's the stereotypical racist stereotype. So when we talk about that, we have that in our mind. But that kind of is the attitude of the whole Conservative Party. We look at that and we should say, well, how can we phrase this where it isn't a handout? Because that's what affirmative action looks like to conservatives. I used to be a conservative not too long ago, and when I was looking at affirmative action, I was like, wow, look at those liberals, trying to freaking put black people into college even though they're dumber. And it was that's not a very accurate representation of it at all. Right now that I've done more research on it and I've changed my position, I can recognize that there are some benefits to DEI. But my main contention with what you said mainly was that it was just that they were intentionally targeting that, right? I don't think
I never said that.
Or not intentionally targeting it, I apologize. That they are targeting certain
I never even said target. I was reading the article that said target.
Right, I have your opening right here. I typed it. It was...
I never said target.
You didn't say target, but what you said was that they were going to pass laws and actions that have severe negative
impacts. That's not the same as targeting. This is the problem, is that you're trying to police me on something when I'm literally just talking about the facts. You're trying to come at this from somebody who is specifically talking about oh, let's change our rhetoric to make it more appealing and such. And I'm like, dude, I'm literally just trying to tell you that this is what's happening. They are pushing stuff that's going to have a heavy impact. We need to agree on that first before we can start engaging in different rhetoric.
Right, but the
Because
problem is
I
that we'll
need
never
you
make
to
sense.
agree with me first before we can do anything. And right now, I don't think we agree.
Right, because the way that you're phrasing it is incredibly one-sided.
How am I phrasing it? I'm not saying that they are specifically targeting. I made certain that they are not specifically targeting people. I'm saying that the outcome of their actions is going to have a massive negative impact on the black community.
Right, but the way that you're phrasing it is that they're trying to repeal civil rights and shit like that, when in reality, they're trying to get rid of shit like DEI, regardless of whether
That's not all they're trying to do, though. You didn't even let me finish my initial statement before we had this conversation. I can go over the list with Project 2025, and then we can do this shit. So, for instance, some of the things that they're planning to do is weakening anti-discrimination laws and cutting essential worker protections. Project 2025 will eliminate key safeguards that protect black workers and bar federal agencies from collecting racial demographic data, making it harder to enforce anti-discrimination laws and combat inequalities, especially in the workplace. Now, if you don't believe me, there are endnotes that cite parts of the article of Project 2025 where that is stated.
Okay, first of all, could you put the article in the chat just so that we
Sure, I can easily put the article in for you. So yeah, if you scroll past the jargon and go straight to how Project 2025 will harm black communities, that's the first tabloid, is the weakening anti-discrimination laws and cutting essential worker protections. This directly has an impact on the income of black workers, which is what we were arguing about in the first place, about how the black community is going to be negatively impacted so that they don't come out of poverty. Because right now, it's not looking good. Sure, it's been getting better, but that can easily change under a new establishment. And right now, this is what they plan to enact, that the Republican Party plans to push through into into government.
Okay, so when we say things like that, where it's like the poverty rate can easily be changed, my only problem with that is that just historically doesn't happen, especially when we look at Trump as an example, right? Historically, ever since 1966, we're seeing a sharp decrease in poverty rate compared to African Americans, and then it plateaus from 1970 to 1994. And then after that, it goes on a steady decrease. It plateaus again, and then it decreases, right? And it decreases. And it doesn't seem to have any specific cause in terms of presidents, because I'm looking at a comparison of the presidents and the poverty rate, and it doesn't seem to be that affected, right? Especially under
Has
Trump's
any
leadership,
president ever done the things that we're doing right now that they plan to enact?
I mean, yeah, this is what Trump was talking about in his 2016 term. That's what he tried to pass.
Yeah, but now he has the ability to do it. He's been already started enacting this. He's already reestablished people. He's been firing out people who don't agree with him. He's been trying to pass laws. He has now a judicial system in his favor where it's mostly made up of conservatives and Republicans. Yes, he has way more power than he did back in 2016.
No, we had that same stuff in 2016.
No, we didn't. Not this level.
The only thing that's changed is that he has presidential immunity. And that is a big thing, but that's not the factor that you're accounting for.
That's not all that's happened, though. He's appointed other people, too. He's already started enacting policies to get rid of people and gut, like, a bunch of different things. Like, the next thing coming up is limiting access to quality education for black students. Project 2025 will exacerbate the education and wealth gap for black students and workers by dismantling the Department of Education, the agency responsible for ensuring civil rights protections in schools, which will allow discriminatory discipline practices to go unchecked. Project 2025 will expand the ongoing coordinated attack on truth in schools and libraries, which will further deny our nation's shameful legacy of racism. It will also make higher education even more inaccessible for black students by privatizing student loans and eliminating student loan forgiveness programs and income-based repayment options, which he's already, and this is stuff that he's doing now. We already have him. He's already trying to get rid of the Department of Education. He wants it gutted. It wants out.
Okay, so everything you just said would also apply to white students, it'd apply to Jewish students, it'd apply to Asian students.
That's not the point. That's not the point. It doesn't matter whether it affects everyone. It's whether or not it has a huge negative impact on black students in particular.
fine.
And this will. This will.
Okay, if you want to say this could have a negative impact on black people, sure, fine.
That
Then
is
the
my entire
then
argument.
The debate's already over then, because I can agree that Trump's a moron and his policies are going to affect everyone negatively, right? But what
Yeah,
I'm
but
saying,
it's going to affect negatively in a way that hurts black people.
Right, but
Yes,
the problem
that
is
was my whole argument.
But why are you focusing on just black people then? Because the whole problem is that it affects everyone.
Because we were talking about black people earlier.
Right, but why would you bring that up as an example of black people being like victims of the system if if this is affecting everyone?
Because when the system targets people,
doesn't
harms people, it hits people of different groups and backgrounds differently. That's the whole point. That's why systemic racism exists. Do you not understand how the system usually plays on the fact that black people tend to get the rougher edge? Why there's so many more black people in jail? Why the black community is overwhelmingly disproportionate in terms of crime stats and whatnot?
Wait, why do you think that black people are committing more crimes?
It's not that they're committing more crimes. It's that they're being arrested. Yes, they're being incarcerated. This is factual. At a higher rate than white people.
Right, why?
Because the system targets them. The police are backgrounds. They grow up in neighborhoods that have been redlined to the point where they're impoverished, and they are then repeated. Then the cops continue to police those areas more often than they compete with white neighborhoods. They also arrest and detain black people more often than they do for white people the same crime. Black people get higher fucking rates in prison, like higher sentences, than white people for the same crimes. There's so much to it. There's so much evidence. That's all backed up by FBI data.
Okay, wait, so let's say we have three communities here. We have the first community, which is black and rich, right? You can call it unrealistic, but they have a black and rich community.
No, there is a black rich community. I don't deny that.
Okay, so the second community is a rich white community. And the third community is a poor white community. Which one do you think the police are going to target?
The police are going to target, obviously, the poor white community, because poverty is what usually impacts. But the fact of the matter is that black people tend to be more impoverished, and there is a racial bias. You can't deny that. That's why we see so many times where, like, black people, even rich black people, get pulled over or have the police called on them, even when they're not, like, they just exist, even when they're not poor. This happens all the time.
Poor white people too.
Yeah, it does happen to poor white people. I don't deny that, but this intentionally happens to black people on a regular basis. It's solely based on their skin color for most of the time. Yes, it is,
What
dude.
do police officers do? That's like, what would you say is like the worst thing that a police officer does typically?
Racial profiling.
Okay, I would say that it's taking people who are vulnerable economically and using their economic disabilities to target
You don't think
them
that the
for
police
benefit
racially
unfair.
profile people?
I
But
would
they
say
never
that
do that?
I would say that they. Okay, so when we say they never do that, right? Of course, it sometimes happens, right? I would say it very rarely happens. It's a very big.
It does not very rarely happen.
Okay, I'm gonna chime in here. Puma, I think if you explained more about how it disproportionately affects black people, I feel
Sure,
like that would get-
I'm gonna look it up just to make sure that I know what the hell I'm talking about. All right, here we go. Let's go with the National Association of Criminal Defense Lawyers. Racially biased policing takes many different forms, from elevated police presences in the neighborhoods of marginalized communities to disproportionate street and vehicle stops and searches to use of force to outright expressions of racism within some police departments. That's just the tagline. Now, a recent report by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, let's see, I just want to make sure when this article came out. Came out on November 29th of 2022. A recent report by the Bureau of Justice Statistics on interactions between police and the public found that black residents were more likely to be stopped by police than white or Hispanic residents. that Black and Hispanic residents were more likely to have multiple contacts with police than white residents, and that when police initiated an interaction, they were twice as likely to threaten or use force against Black and Hispanic residents than against white residents.
What area is this sampling from?
This is a report by the Bureau of Justice Statistics.
Right, is this like the average for like the whole nation, or is this like a specific?
I'm guessing, yeah. According to a report from the Sentencing Project, Black Americans comprised 27% of all individuals arrested in America in 2016, about twice their proportion of the total population. Further, Black youth made up 35% of juvenile arrests in 2016, despite only accounting for 15% of the total youth population in the US. The authors argue that main drivers of these disparities include disproportionate levels of police contact with Black Americans, residential segregation, and concentrated urban poverty, continuing broken windows police policies in many cities, and revenue-driven policing. Local level data provides more insight into policing across the country. A study of traffic stops in San Diego between 2014 and 2015 found that Black and Hispanic drivers were more likely than white drivers to be searched following a traffic stop, even though white drivers were more likely to be found with contraband. Similarly, in 2016, a Chicago Police Accountability Task Force found that Black and Latino drivers were searched by police 4 times as often as white drivers, even though police found contraband on white drivers twice as often.
Okay, so
There's more to the article, and I can keep going if you really want me to.
okay, so very quick. Let's just start on that, right? I'm sharing my screen right now. This is a map of the United States with the location quotient of police and sheriff's patrol officers by area as of May 2020. So I believe this was before the George Floyd protests. So when did BLM start? And this is an important notion, because if it's before the BLM stuff, this is before all
Wait,
that.
Black Lives Matter didn't started well before then. They
Right,
just
okay, so the organization started in 2013, but the massive
you could have just asked me. I would have told you 2020 is when the major ones happened because of COVID. That's when we all had time to be out and protest.
Right, but I'm
And
trying
also
to
when
figure out,
George Floyd
I'm
happened.
trying to figure out if it's before this article or after this article, because that is a big May 26th. Okay, so this was 6 days before the George Floyd incident happened.
Okay.
So when we look at this, the biggest thing that I can see immediately is that a lot of this is along areas that you would expect more crime based off of economic, right? So down here on the border, you have, this is an exception because this is where we have a lot of Mexican cartels and a lot of Mexican illegal immigrants coming in, right? We expect more.
Where does this screenshot come from?
This comes from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's an official website of the U.S. government. It's the
Occupational Employment and Wage Statistics.
Right.
Okay.
So this is looking at police patrols per area in terms of economics instead of race, right? So when we look at it, we see this.
Wait, hold on. Can you scroll a little up again?
Yeah,
Location quotient of police and sheriff's patrol officers by area.
Right, and it breaks it down into these areas. Of course, in these western states, you're gonna have a lot larger proportions because there's not that many areas up here you distinguish from. Whereas in California and the West Coast, and even in Michigan, you see that there's a lot more areas to break down because the area, like the crime statistics, are a lot more different, right? But when we look at it, right, oddly enough, right, a lot of this is around, like, even the South has a higher like police rate compared to the North, and even though, like, especially when we're looking at even these rural areas that are historically fairly white, right? If you look at an area like Detroit.
Yeah, true, but does that... Yeah, but you're saying... What are you trying to say with this? Okay, just allow me to ask where you're going with this.
Okay, so the map with this is that everything you just said is an argument as to why we should pull black people out of poverty. Not that black people are being targeted by the police. They're being targeted. Okay, so when you say
did you not listen to me when I said?
Hold on. So when you're saying that black people are being targeted by police, right? And you're talking about how they're 2 times more likely to have an interaction with an officer that results in a threat from the officer. There are 2 factors that go into that from my point of view. The first factor is economic, right? So when we're looking at it, a lot of the time, if someone has a lot less economic stuff, that does increase the risk of them actually being violent due to the fact that they are going to have a lot less to lose. That is not the majority of cases, but that is definitely a possibility that officers have to consider when they're doing their job.
Yeah, but then how do you, wait, hold on. Just to be clear, how do you account for when white people who are stopped are twice as likely to have contraband on them being stopped less than black and Hispanic people?
Because
in San Diego alone.
In San Diego alone, I would assume.
Yeah.
Okay, so based off of that stat, I would probably say that in a lot of these cases, these drivers were either impaired, like visibly impaired while they were driving, or they were.
So the wait, hold on. When you say the drivers, do you mean like the citizens were impaired?
Yeah, like the person who was driving the vehicle would more likely be. Like, I'm assuming that this is a large amount of these are from traffic reports, right?
Local level data provides more insight into policing. A study of traffic stops. Yeah.
Okay,
in
yeah.
San Diego between 2014 and 2015 found that black and Hispanic drivers were more likely than white drivers to be searched following a traffic stop.
So the first thing about that is that when we're looking at San Diego is like around here, right? It's like it's in the Southern California area. So the first thing we have to consider is that there can be a racial profile in here. And the reason that I will admit that, because again, the reason that we have a lot more policing down here in these rural areas compared to up here is because we have a lot more Southern immigrants coming in from down here, right? So you are going to have a lot more unfair stops. And I will admit that it is a problem, but that isn't because of their race, it's because of their nationality.
What?
It's because they're brown and they might be American citizens, but the problem is that we have an illegal immigration problem. It's not necessarily...
Wait, what? Wait, hold on. How does black people who...
You said black and Latino, so I was assuming that a large...
Yeah, black and Latino. Yes.
Latino crime is more common in the South, so I would assume that it's
So?
probably going to be Latinos.
Well, it's happening to both Hispanic and black people.
If you could get... Well, yeah, it's happening to both, but a majority of that's probably going to be Latinos because a lot of the time, you see a lot of racial profiling.
Found that black and Hispanic, meaning both of them were getting it more.
I don't have a separate stat to prove that which one it is, right? Because as far as I know, it could be 0% black people committing crimes, and the rest of that is just...
Why would they specify black and Hispanic like that?
Why would they? That's a very good question. Why wouldn't you report the stats in two different numbers? That makes way more sense than having...
What do you mean in two different... Dude, I'm telling... This is about racial biases. It's saying both black and Hispanic individually.
Why would you... Okay, black and Hispanic individually?
So it's found that black and Hispanic drivers were more likely than white drivers to be searched following a traffic stop.
Is that saying that the two groups independently have the same rate? Or is it saying that that group as a whole has the same rate?
I mean, I would say individually, that's my interpretation.
My interpretation is that they're seeing it as a group. So I might not...
Okay, well, what's the percent? Well, hold on, just to be clear. You're saying that they're racially biased just towards Hispanic people. And that black people are just getting lumped in just to make it look like that's what the Federal Bureau would do.
Okay, so when I say that...
The Bureau of Justice Statistics would do that.
When I say that Latinos are being racially profiled, and how I have a problem with those two groups being mixed in together. The problem that I have with that isn't necessarily that. I'm not disagreeing that they're being...
Because there's more stuff here about black people individually later on in the article. And you're focusing pretty hyper-specifically on that.
Right, because this is...
I feel like you're trying to make it seem like that the
I didn't know you wanted an answer to your question. My bad. If you asked me a question, I expected an opportunity to answer.
No, because I'm getting frustrated right now.
I'm going to answer the question.
Let Water speak.
Okay.
So when you ask me why I have a problem with black and Latino being mixed together, my contention with that isn't that there is no racial profiling between those, right? But when it comes to the southern border, right? The southern border is, I would say, a large exception, right? But regardless, even if we don't consider it an exception, that's not because of the fact that they're Latino.
That isn't what I asked, by the way. I just want to make that clear.
Okay, but then what's the question?
I don't even remember what question I asked. I just know that wasn't it. Because I know that wasn't it.
Okay,
I asked wait, so you think that the Bureau just like happened to do that, would just put these two together and not as a way of saying that like, oh, just combine these two things together? That's what they would do? The Bureau of Justice and Statistics would have black and Hispanic residents mentioned in this?
Their sourcing didn't specify. That's definitely a possibility, yeah.
So they did this, that you think that they did this specifically, that they have a racial or some sort of agenda? Is that what you're trying to say?
I never even mentioned the agenda.
No, because that's what you're implying when you say that.
That's not what I'm implying.
Then why would they?
I don't think they're taking the statistic accurately. Now, I could be wrong on
they
that.
Don't
I don't
take...
have the article. I don't know if they took them as two separate things. You haven't provided evidence as two separate things or one single thing, even though I asked for it. Because
I have the study right here if you want to
right,
check.
I asked you, right? So I'm assuming that you either know the article or you just.
You never asked me for the study.
I asked you for where you got the number from, and I was asking if it's.
You never asked me that either.
I literally asked you if it was two separate numbers or one single number. You can go back. And
Yeah, I thought you meant if in the article. I didn't know you wanted
right,
that
I was
specific.
I was asking about that.
Well, if you,
specific
yeah,
study.
that's because you didn't ask me for. You never asked me specifically for the study, though. I'd have to look through the study to find it.
I mean, I thought that me asking for the number would imply that, but sure, yeah. I mean.
Okay, I'll link you the study here.
It'd be better if you were like researched on this before we had the conversation.
I didn't expect to do this at fucking 11 p.m., dog.
Well, it's 12.
What the fuck, dude?
It's 12:30.
I didn't think I need to educate you on racial discrimination in the U.S.
Alright.
I'm white. Why am I doing this for you?
I'm white too.
Well,
Why are
we're
you
all
not?
white? Okay. So,
Yeah.
like, I feel like we're kind of on this side discussion about, like, whether or not this specific statistic is, like, lumped in together with.
Yeah, sure. I
something or
can bring
something,
it
but-
back. I can bring it back to what we were originally talking about.
Right. If
The
you- if you
problem
could do
with
that, I'll give you a couple minutes to.
So, back to that whole thing is the idea that these communities are more negatively impacted due to discrimination, and Republicans are usually behind laws that target them with I think it was state IDs where I remember specifically there was a law that was passed by, I think it was South or North Carolina. I think it was South Carolina. I could be wrong, but it's one of the Carolinas. That the then Supreme Court found that it targeted the state ID laws for voting targeted black people with absolute surgical precision. Those were the exact words from the documents. I even read it myself from I think it was the court case documents. The Republican Party has been the party. I don't think anyone would disagree that they've outright stated that they don't believe in racial discrimination. A lot of big Republican politicians believe this shit, and you think that you're expecting me to believe that they aren't directly targeting black people, even though they see all this shit and just go, yeah, that just happens. Yeah, there's no discrimination. Yeah, it just happens. Like, come on. And then you gotta take into account of the actual Project 2025. You're expecting me to be more educated and tell you where you're wrong when you are speaking on things that you yourself have not educated on.
Okay,
That's a very awful thing to say to me when you know that you haven't educated yourself on this either.
Okay, so first of all, I have educated myself on this topic. That's why
You clearly haven't. You didn't. You told me you didn't even read how Project 2025.
Sir, I'm not done talking, sir.
It's getting a little hostile. Okay. Take the temperature down a little bit. Water. Try and reframe your point a little more clearly, and we'll go on.
All right. So here's my thing: is that this just speaks to another reason why Republicans are going to have negative impacts on the black community. Is the rhetoric they push, it's the policies they push, it's the statements they make, the plans they make, the way that they do things. This is why a lot of black communities vote Democratic, because they know that Republicans don't like them. Even though a lot of black families are conservative, they still vote Democrat because they know that the Republicans outright target them. This is a well-established thing.
Okay, so I don't know exactly where to begin there, because you made all those points before, which I wasn't able to respond to, even though the mod asked me to respond, and then you took over. I'm not exactly sure where to respond.
Okay. Let me backpedal. Let me backpedal on specific things.
Can I please just answer the question that the mod asked?
Okay. What was the question you want to answer? You thought I asked that you want to answer.
You asked, that the moderator asked.
What did the moderator ask?
Okay,
so
let Water clear his point up. Exactly what he's trying to make the point with this map right here, and that's where we can move.
Oh, okay.
the main point of this map is that when you look at the racial demographics and the economic demographics, the economic side of things describes the situation more accurately than the racial side of that. Because if you looked at, again, with the example that I showed earlier with the three
Wait,
communities.
hold on. Just one more thing. Just to be clear, one more thing. Can you link this in the chat?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So continuing with that, just to finish the clarification, when we're looking at the economic side of things with the three communities, right, you're going to see a higher police presence in an impoverished white community compared to a rich black community. And the reason for that is because the economic side is more accurately describing things. Now, if you want to bring in a fourth community that involves black impoverished people, I would say that there would be more policing in the black impoverished community, but it's not specifically because they're black. It's because of the culture surrounding police in the black community. That's another big thing that I don't think we touched on yet. That the black culture, and I'm not saying that it's inferior. We hear that from conservatives a ton. It's the most annoying thing, right?
Wait, hold on. I just looked into this. It says the metropolitan areas with the highest concentration of jobs. Okay, so blank areas indicate data not available. Okay, so sorry. Sorry, I'm interrupted. Continue.
Yeah, that's just my main thesis, that the economic side of things describes things better than the racial side of things.
Well, yeah, obviously economics has a lot to do with it. I'm not saying that's not true. And yeah, I do think that getting them out of poverty would help. But
Right,
that's the point. They are being targeted
Right,
because is a racial discrimination. There's both racial discrimination and economic reasons for why this is happening, because they were already targeted well in the past to the point where they are stuck in this position.
Right, but I think where we get split off is where the driving factor that comes from, right? We can, like, it's obviously a combination of economic and racial, but
Yeah.
I'm saying that the driving factor is economic, while you're saying the driving factor is racial.
No, it's always going to be economic. I don't deny it. But
Okay,
but the racial thing does come into effect where they get targeted more than even poor whites. That's unironically true.
I would concede that, but with like a modifier to it, right? So like, of course, black people are going to be more targeted today than they are like their white compatriots, right? And I showed that with the fourth communities example, right? When we introduced the fourth community, you're still going to see heavier policing in the black impoverished area compared to the white impoverished area. But I think another driving factor here that we're ignoring is culture, right? I'm not saying that fucking gangster rap is going to be the thing that's killing cops or like killing black people in the streets.
Why would you bring up gangster rap? Like what?
Because that's the main thing that conservatives bring up.
Oh.
When they talk
Wait,
about-
so wait, hold on. What did you just say there?
I'm saying that gangster
That's
rap
the main thing that the conservatives bring up, like
Right,
the
that
Republicans bring up.
Right, I'm clarifying right now why when I'm talking about culture, I'm not referring to black music or black art. I'm talking about, for example, this whole stereotype that the police are not your friend. Historically, that has been the case, and there's a very valid reason to think that in the black community, right? It's an entirely justified thing. But I think the problem is that we have to break the stigma somehow between these two communities. And I'm going to admit right now, I don't necessarily have an answer, right? Because I know in my state, Michigan, we've been trying to bridge that gap, and it's a very difficult process, right? We have a lot of like police.
And I'm not asking you for an answer. I understand that you agree with me on that.
Right.
But the thing is, Republicans make it worse. That's the point. That's why you had to specify that's what conservatives say, because they're the ones saying this the most. They're the ones that target black people, like directly. Sometimes outright. Like you can't tell me that a party mixed in with those kinds of people who outright target them, who outright don't believe that there's any form of racial discrimination, that the black community is just like, it's just a culture that they quote culture. It's about culture, not race. That we are all just like, I don't see color shit. That they're not outright trying to, that they're outright not gonna do stuff that's gonna make it so much worse. That's gonna keep black people in poverty. That's the point I was trying to make from the beginning. They're doing this. Like, do you not agree with that?
I would agree with you, like from like a liberal standpoint, that of course that's the case.
I'm not a liberal, but okay.
Well, like I'm talking about from my perspective as a liberal, right? I'm not necessarily saying you're a liberal, but
Okay, thank you.
You're
I understand that. But like, wait, what do you mean by as a liberal?
I'm personally a liberal, and this is like
No, I know. I mean, sorry. Let me rephrase that. Okay, wait. So, let me see. Like, you mean like as in that because from your liberal perspective, you can agree with that, is what you're saying?
I'm saying that like a lot of the ideas that I'm spinning are like really like mainstream like liberal things. Like because I'm a liberal, this is pretty much the position I take.
I mean, yeah, true. But also, this is just factually true.
I mean, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't mean to be that guy, but I would say liberals are pretty based in facts compared to the conservative counterparts.
I don't think that's like debatable at all.
I mean, of course, conservatives who are listening to this are probably gonna hate that I say that, but yeah.
I mean, yeah, but I'm literally making an argument saying they're going to make black people like staying in poverty. Okay,
they already really don't like this, so yeah.
Yeah, like what do you want? And I don't think you disagree with me. I think you're trying to. You want to know what I think? I think you're trying to find the middle ground, and you're so caught up on trying to bridge the gap to make lives better by trying to appeal to those conservatives that you're missing the whole point that you're now coming across like you're fencing the issue rather than actually taking a position, and that you're trying to curb my response when they're literal and trying to like go like, okay, look, there's a middle ground here, but the middle ground is somewhere close to insane. That's the problem. You want me to meet the middle ground between far like racial divide. They're full on racism. They do not care. They have been doing this for years. They have looked at the data. They do not give a shit. And because they're moving further and further right, I have to cater to them as they move right. Yet I'm still in the scientific right. I'm the scientific left. So they're shifting the goalpost towards them. That's where the middle ground's going. You need to plant your feet sometimes and say, no, this is not negotiable. You can't do this. This is actually having a negative impact. Just say it. Now, if you want to work on rhetoric, that's fine. But I need you to agree with me on the fact that this is what's happening first, that they are targeting this. Whether or not intentionally or not, they are targeting black people.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I could agree with that with the unintentionally sure targeting black.
Well, I mean, it's half and half because some of them aren't. I will grant that because I don't think every Republican's like that. I think most of them are usually acting out of Trump's pocket, who is catering to his fan base,
Right.
his voter base. But a good amount are doing that and have done that. They have outright done it in the past. Like, just blatantly. They have even said, no. Like, I even remember the quote by the guy who, like, that, remember that South Carolina incident I mentioned with the state ID? The guy literally said, no, it's not a racial thing. We're just trying to get less Democrat voters and shit as a means of protection. Even though it was outright targeting black people specifically by shutting down local stuff in the black community. They did this specifically targeting black people knowing they'd be vote Democrat.
It's definitely something I would.
That's why it doesn't matter whether or not they intentionally do it. At the end of the day, well, okay, to use the most extreme example to highlight the point, it's like saying, I didn't intentionally do a genocide, so I guess it's not as bad, right? No, you still did the genocide.
I mean, I personally...
Again, this is using the most extreme example, but you get the idea.
I think that, I guess the most alarming part then is that we see increase in support, like, for specifically for Trump in the black community.
Yeah, that's what's worrying.
That's like, if you look at my screen share here, right? Like, it's crazy. Like this Newsweek article, I don't know how reputable.
You know what else? You know who else actually favored Trump was the Hispanic group, despite
yeah, that's ironic. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that's you can't really take this at face value. You have to acknowledge the fact that just because he's getting more support from the black community or the Hispanic community does not mean he's going to do things that are in favor of these communities. That the Republican Party is outright against them.
Well, right. I think
their main voter base is white evangelicals.
Oh, right, for sure. Right, that's like why his
particularly racist ones.
Yeah, I can't really disagree with it. It's getting really hard to disagree with that.
Yeah, and I don't think you're a bad guy. I got frustrated and such because it was hard to reach you at this point, but now I think we're on the same page.
Right, like I can understand why you're frustrated, right? Like I would be frustrated too if I was in the same position where, like, if I thought someone just didn't understand like what I was trying to get across, or like understand the facts that I'm working with. I get that.
And keep in mind, I'm far left. Voting Democrat is already like my fucking, like, I gotta give where it's good, okay? That's my middle ground here. You want me to go further than that?
Oh no, you're a socialist.
Before we move on, do we want to like wrap this up, I guess?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Sorry,
like,
I forgot we were being recorded for this.
Oh, right.
But I could give you 5-ish minutes again to.
You want to just do a joint closer together?
Sure, I'm fine.
Joint close. All right, we're down with that.
So I think we both agree that there is a significant issue with the black community that has been getting better, but it is also just as similar that with today's new stuff, it could easily go wrong for the black community, and that the Republican Party will actively do its part, whether intentionally or not. Really doesn't matter to me, is that they will do their part in making sure the black community does not make any progress.
I can agree with that. I think that in the future I'd like to talk more so about like the rhetoric, but other than that,
obviously rhetoric. I can't say this to conservatives. I think we can both agree that just calling conservatives dumb fucks, like, I have conservative like roommate in the next room trying to sleep.
Right. Like, yeah, I think that the argument was yeah, I think it was pretty.
Yeah, I think we went in with different intentions. I feel like you wanted to argue for better rhetoric, whereas I wanted to argue the facts of the matter. And I
Right,
think
and
that's
then,
where we were getting caught off. Obviously, the rhetoric is important, duh. But I wanted to make sure that we understood what the facts were before getting into rhetoric. That was my thing. And that's where we deferred. And I'm
Right.
glad we can meet now and agree on that, on these things.
Yeah, this is a pretty like productive conversation.
Yeah.